I think that there's I guess even for someone like me who I think a lot about these things and I enjoy reading, this is kind of my world. I have been really shocked by the recklessness and irresponsibility of the leadership within the military and the political class. Like even for a group of people, I understand there's going to be some corruption, there's going to be mistakes made and things like that. I mean, but look, even in the George W. Bush administration, John Mearsheimer covers this in his book. It's a very interesting little detail in American history. But immediately after 9/11, it was Colin Powell, probably the wisest member of the Bush administration, although he still fell in line and sold the war that he knew was based off lies. But that's between him and his maker at this point. But so Colin Powell went to George W. Bush and was like, you got to push for a two-state solution. I mean, that's the, if we got to go right to the core of this. This is why we deal with this terrorism problem. You got to, and then ultimately he said it was Tom DeLay and other forces who were like, oh no, you can't go against the lobby like that. You'll be a one-term president. And so he backed off of it. But just the point being that like there was an understanding by some wise people at the top of the military that like, look, this is why we deal with this terrorism problem. And there seems to be almost no thought of what, for even if you could remove any feeling of humanity for the poor Palestinians and what they are going through, the national security risk that this imposes on the American people to be, it's not as if like the world isn't so stupid to not know that this is America's genocide, not Israel's. Like, I mean, yes, it's Israel doing it, but they could never get away with this if it wasn't for the full support of the US government. Again, like Tucker Carlson, our friend last night, was breaking down Israel, like going back to basics here, Israel is a teeny little country in the Middle East. It's like they always like to say they're the size of New Jersey. They don't often mention they don't have the GDP of New Jersey. Okay, this is not, they are in no position to get away with any of what they're doing, including maintaining the occupation. They're in no position. Netanyahu goes around and talks a big game about what Israel can do. This is your baby brother talking about how he can win every bar fight, knowing that you're behind him, ready to crack skulls if anyone messes with him. But the fact that there seems to be either there's no feeling for this, or everybody is so controlled one way or another that they just can't act on it. But if just maintaining the occupation was this big security risk because it engendered all this hatred in the Muslim world against us, well, what is this? What have we seen over the last 2 years? And like the blowback doesn't always come within 18 months or something like that. Like we are opening ourselves up for a whole nother generation of young Muslim men to be radicalized toward hating us, even worse than we've already been dealing with. And there seems to be almost no thought of like, oh, that ought to be the concern of the American government, the national security of our country.
Well, unlike New Jersey, Israel also does not have any good pizza, movies. These guys having grown up in Philadelphia, I mean, that's very disappointing. Having been to Israel several times, that's something they lack. On the other hand, I think, we have to understand something. People like me, I grew up as a Quaker. My mother's family being in the country since 1681. In Philadelphia, I went to one of the oldest Quaker private school in the country. We were all male. Once again, this is before, mixed everything. And Israel was treated as this triumph of the Second World War, that in view of what had happened, and remember, the Jews collectively at one point or another have been thrown out of almost every country in Europe and the Middle East over 2,000 years. Now, we don't want to go down that road and ask that, why is that? But that was taught to us. We heard that. And, they were murdered and butchered during the Second World War. We now have a state for them. So for most of us, everything began in 1947, 48, without any understanding of what had happened in the previous 80 to 100 years and how this sort of Israeli state crept into the mix, thanks to the Rothschild banking cartel and people like Benjamin Disraeli, the Prime Minister of Great Britain, has always been one of my heroes. So we saw Israel as this very virtuous place that had lots of smart people that could do interesting things and were a blessing to humanity. And, I've been to Israel several times, and all of my dealings were always with the IDF. people who are either in the military or had been, and I liked them enormously, got along with them. There was always this undercurrent, especially in Gaza. I visited Gaza, the Israeli headquarters down there, in 2020 in February. And I saw everything that they did. And the Israelis had that place locked down so tight you can't even begin to imagine. I mean, the quality of their intelligence that they did. I mean, if somebody on the other side shot at someone, an Israeli soldier in a tower or something on the outskirts of Gaza, they would know within, I would say, 90 seconds who it was. They had everybody's picture, everybody's cell phone number. They knew where everybody lived. They had all the tunnels mapped. I mean, this is a brilliant operation. And I remember asking a couple of officers that were there that were escorting me. I said, well, what are you going to do about this long term? I mean, there's nothing can be done with these people? I mean, surely they have this nice, as Trump said, nice property sits on the Mediterranean. Is there something? Oh, no, it's hopeless. Have you tried to? Oh, no, yeah, it's hopeless. Can't do anything. So I didn't say anything more. But when the attack happened on 7 October, one of the things I began thinking about immediately is, how did this happen? And within 2 weeks, it became pretty damn obvious to me that this was not an accident. This was deliberate. They let it happen. Now, when I say they, who are we talking about? We're talking about the leadership of the military, the state, the intelligence. And now we have women. The Israelis are very smart the way they employ their draftees. They take 6 or 7 very brilliant young women and say, your whole focus in life, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week for the next 2 years, whatever, is Gaza. And everything that happens there and all the intelligence, they monitor everything. They picked up that this was happening, and they've said so publicly, and they reported it. Then you have the deputy chief of staff of for intelligence in the Egyptian military, who gave a personal phone call to the head of intelligence, I guess it was Shin Bet, or it could have been Mossad, I don't know which, and said, look, you got an attack coming, this thing. And of course, by that time, a lot of people knew. They'd watched them, practice. Then this horrible attack happens, but the attack was horrible enough. But then, as Max Blumenthal points out, they had to lie about all of it and make it seem much worse than it was. Not that it wasn't bad. Of course it was bad. And, this was very tough for me to deal with because I had this very positive picture. And then it became very obvious. This is a trigger to unleash this massive murder and expulsion campaign. And that's what it's been. Now we know there are over 600,000 people have died. An estimated 70% of them are children. I don't know what the ages they're giving. It's unbelievable. It is something that I could never conceive of in the modern world, particularly involving Israel, because I saw this state in a very different light from the way I see it today. And I think this is hard. It's hard. I'm a boomer, right? So all the boomers, they immediately say, well, the hell with these people in Gaza. But people are people. I don't care what they look like or whether you like them or not or what their religion is. I don't see that the average human being on the planet deserves to be exterminated because another person somewhere else says so. This is very tough. This is very hard. And I don't know that there's any solution that we could embrace other than to cut off the aid and stop it.
Yeah, I think that's right. I mean, I think it's the obvious, it's one of the kind of parallels in a way between Israel and Ukraine is that you see that, and this is, I guess, goes kind of to the heart of why the founders of this country never wanted us to be an empire. Because even when you get in these entangling alliances and you realize that even if well-intentioned, and I certainly am not claiming that I think any of this stuff is well-intentioned, but even if well-intentioned, there's just a tremendous moral hazard that comes along with these security guarantees and blank checks where you give, you put people in a position. Again, it's like saying to your little brother, like you're going out to the bar and you go, you get in a fight with anyone, I got your back. Well, the problem with that now is that you're encouraging him to maybe get in some fights that he otherwise would have talked out and not came to fisticuffs. And obviously, in Ukraine, that's just clearly true. That there would have been a negotiated peace at the very beginning of this, which almost undoubtedly would have been more in the Ukrainian favor than what the final agreement, whenever this thing ends, will be.
Well,
But
you know,
also,
there's
sorry,
an expression, if I could say something real quick, when if there is no accountability, there is no performance. And we really haven't held
right.
people accountable, military or political, for a very long time for doing anything. And as a result, they think they can do anything. In other words, there are no constraints. And that's really what you're saying.
Yeah, exactly.
You know, and my grandfather, my maternal grandfather, was in the First World War. He came back on active duty in the Second, but in the First World War, he was in the Army. He was a private. He enlisted after he graduated from the University of Pennsylvania. So did most of his classmates. You won't see that happen anymore.
Yeah,
And in fact, he used to say to me, he always wanted me to go to Annapolis, which I absolutely did not want to go to because I don't like going to sea. Really bothers me. I don't like to be out of sight of land. I'm happy flying. And I figure if it fails, well, it'll be quick and done with it. I don't want to feed the sharks or something else, from a ship. So I didn't ever want to do that. So he would say to me, though, he said, Doug, I was in the Army, and in the Second World War, I was in the Navy. And I was a private, and then I was a master sergeant in just a few months, and then I became an officer. And he said, but in the Army, in a war, you don't get much to eat. Whatever you get to eat is cold. You freeze. You live in the mud. It's nasty, and people shoot at you all the time. He said, so if you're in the Navy, you're aboard ship, and most of the time you have nice, clean, dry clothes, and everything's warm, and the food's excellent, and you always have coffee, and you're not really under fire very much. So I really think you should go to Annapolis. And I said, I went into the Army. He wasn't entirely wrong. I found that out the hard way. But having said all of that, my family on both sides, everybody was violently opposed. I mean, almost to the point of violence against war in 1917. And, the first point was, what has Germany or Austria-Hungary done to us? Nothing. What's the basis for this? Who made them the enemy? Why are we committing the national treasury and 2 or 3 million soldiers to this war? And of course, the casualties we took were terrible. People don't realize that. In 110 days of fighting, we had 318,000 casualties. People don't realize that. That's far more intense than, frankly, most of what happened in the Second War. Second War was episodic. And we had 110,000 killed. And if you do the math, that comes down to about 1,000 dead for every day of fighting. Now, I don't think most people in this country would tolerate that sort of thing. But yet we have a lot of people right now talking about war potentially with the Russians, war potentially with Iran, which could inevitably, or I would argue will inevitably bring in Russia, China, and other states in the Middle East now. And on top of this, we're talking about Venezuela, a place about which most of us know absolutely nothing. And I don't see any serious existential military threat emanating from Venezuela. We are out of touch with reality. We don't know what this word war means anymore. And that's the greatest danger because, in Europe in 1914, that was the problem. In Germany, France, Britain, Russia, everywhere. They hadn't had a major war for 50 years or almost 50. And people thought, this will just be, a few months, it'll be over and, we'll trade some territory and we'll be back to normal. Well, that's not what happened. And if we get involved in this war as we are now in the Middle East and potentially in Europe, because even though President Trump has said, I really don't want to do this anymore, so I'm just going to give you weapons and you can pay us for them and then you go do whatever you want. We're still there. We still have 100,000 men along the border. If this thing is pressed by the Europeans, you're going to see widespread destruction in Germany, Poland, Great Britain, any number of places. We're not going to be able to stay out of that. So we've lost the sense that our number one priority in foreign and defense policy should be avoid war. Instead, we seem to be in the hunt for it. As you and I were talking before this began. Two wars aren't enough. Don't worry, we got a third one over here. This is nuts.
Yeah.
It's crazy, and none of it is affordable.